Awesome. Friends, welcome, welcome. Team. No, I just wanted to say we'll try to make it a little bit more interactive. I think the way that Rivington and that Sapphire has been doing it so far with you asking questions open-ended as we go is actually really cool to have that, because we're going to knock a few things going through. I'm not necessarily saying that this presentation here for me in terms of color commentary is the right way to go. But I'm going to share my experiences of how I do, how I prepare, how I cast, what I look at. We'll have like an experience together or an exercise together so we can look at it. And in the end, we'll talk about my experiences working with an agency so far. Because this is still new to me. I only signed to an agency October 30th of last year. So it hasn't been a year yet, but I'll tell you like why I went with an agency and what are my next steps basically signing with an agency, and if it's actually a right way to start for you guys at the same time. I know we already had a small conversation yesterday, Dan, but we'll look it through once we get to that point. So looking at all these topics at the same time, I'll just do a brief overview of what's play-by-play casting, what's color casting, then going into myself as a color caster, how I prepare for events, and then my style of casting. That's where we're going to get into the exercise. So we're going to work on that together, and we could visualize how I visualize the game, and then ask questions as we go, which ties in number 3 and number 4. And then in the next steps following this exercise, how do you feel after that? Sounds good?
Yeah.
Awesome. So play-by-play versus color. So to start things off with the play-by-play, their role is basically the storyteller, right? They're like the little flute in an orchestra that's going to do all the solos and all the leads in terms of the orchestra, while the color commentator, we'll see into the next slide, is going to be more of like a supporting cast. So they're going to be talking about the present time, the action at hand. So if I'm looking at this slide over here, where do you think a play-by-play is mostly going to be focusing their eyes on when they want to describe the action?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so I'm a play-by-play caster, right? And I'm looking at this image right here. So just an example, this is like an in-game for what happened in Berlin between 100 Thieves and Gambit, right? So we're playing on Icebox over here. We're going into round number 12. So as a play-by-play, if I want to start describing the action, or if I'm looking at the screen, where do you think I focus the most when I'm bringing out the action as a play-by-play caster? Please go ahead.
Probably like where everybody is set up on the map and
Okay.
the utility and where it's like kind of landing towards.
Yep. Okay. So we talk. Oh yes. So the microphone. Sorry. So actually, we just mentioned about talking about the radar. What's where the players are positioned. What we have currently as utilities. So ultimates, abilities on both ends. There's also the scoreboard. You can look at the bottom that Sapphire mentioned, because we're still in the freeze time. And then of course, what's going to be happening over here too, right? Because once we get into the game, this is going to disappear. But with barracks, you have the sides that are still going to be available. But what's still very important here as a play-by-play caster is they're mostly going to be talking into the present time. What are people currently doing, right? So if you're going to look at, hey, here's the setup right now for the attackers, then you could kind of say, okay, well, looks like we have 3 players looking to set up towards the A site. You have this Viper that's looking down to lurk towards mid, and then you also have this Omen that's on the B site, right? We'll talk about what color does after, but as a supporting role and how they speak, right? They dictate the pacing of the broadcast. So as I mentioned before, it comes down to like the tempo and how you want to bring the action. So is it going to be like the slow pace setup? It's just going to start very, very slow to explain how things are going. Then you're going to try to ramp up to the action in the first interactions of the map of into the round. Then when it gets into like the highlight kills or whatnot, then that's when the play-by-play is also going to bring in that hype, right, into the action. So as I mentioned at the bottom here, the hype man or the hype woman. Last but not least, we have, and there's more, but I think these are the main points that we could look at. And then we have that the play-by-play sets up the color commentator. What do you think I mean by that?
Here, I'll take that.
Yeah, sure.
So for setting up the color commentator, like certain like talking points or certain focuses that they can be bringing on, if you're talking about like the utility that was used during the round or how that made an impact, you can say that had an impact, which then lead to them to like breaking down like why it was important to securing the round or denying something.
Perfect, yeah, and that's very good, what Sierra's mentioning. You're basically talking at the end of the round, the action just happened, and then it's like, wow, what did they actually do right now, color commentator, my partner, that allowed for the execution to actually happen for Team A versus Team B. That's a great way to just completely set up the question so that your color commentator could answer the question. But the other one as well is another way to look. I don't know if you had anything else to add, actually, Dan, based on Sierra, because you said you had something to say.
Yeah, it was a little bit of the same. It was if there's a crazy play that happens, the color is going to usually analyze what just happened and
Yeah.
also talk about what it means for the next couple rounds.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't necessarily always have to set it up as a question as well, right? So I think the best way, if you want to set up your color commentator, is to make sure that you leave it open-ended and not only as a question. So for example, if it comes down to like, Hiko, what a clutch on a 2 versus 1 on Icebox, for example, that Heather showed earlier on today. So Hiko clutches a 2 versus 1, what a play. I can't believe he was able to get that done. And just that in itself, and emphasizing on Hiko alone, could also set up your color commentator to follow the pace of where your play-by-play is at and continue to talk about Hiko. Right? But if we get into a timeout, for example, that's where you can get into those open-ended questions like, man, what has been going so well for 100 Thieves? Why are they calling for a timeout right now if they're still winning? And you keep that open, and then the color commentator could also use that into whatever way that they want and walk away with whatever direction that they want to. Because you don't really want to corner your color commentator as well when you're setting them up for the question, right? Or for following up with the analysis. Does that make sense? Perfect. Now we'll go into the color commentary. So as I mentioned here, they're the supporting cast. So you heard about the flute going on before, so they're basically the strings in the back, making sure that they add a little bit more emphasis into like the solo that's being played by the play-by-play. So you pay attention to what's going on around the action. So where do you think now, looking at the same screenshot, where the color commentator is going to focus on? Yes, go ahead.
There's something that I learned from Sideshow, especially for Valorant. It would be like 60 to 80% looking at the map and the positioning that is taking place, and then the rest of the actual action and ultimate and all that.
Exactly. That's the perfect the perfect answer that Sideshow was talking about too. 60% up there too. That's basically what I'm going to do as well. Because as the observer at the same time, they're looking at basically the little numbers around the avatars, right? Around the little blips around the radar. And that's where you know, okay, where's the rotation coming from? Who's actually still alive? And as we're looking at this over here and who's still alive in this example, well, I know we have a 5 versus 5, but let's say I'm looking at these guys are setting up on the A site. Who's actually playing the defense right now, right? I know it's pixelated, but I think we have a Jet and a Jet and I think it was a Sage, if I'm not mistaken, or a Reyna. I think it was Shadows over there, right? So they're like, okay, so who are going to be the 2 agents that are holding up the A site? What do they have in terms of utility to try to prevent that as well, right? And as you're trying to figure out what's going on with the action as a color commentator, you're trying to explain to the audience what's going to be the push and pull, the battle between the utilities, the battle between the positioning of these 2 sides, and maybe how we can have an advantage technically on who's going to be working the information, working around the map, and how are they going to defend it? Can they win it, right? If you look really quickly, potentially you might give the advantage for the attackers at this point because there's 3 players going into the A site versus 2 players holding the defense, right? So technically if you're going all these trades and it's 1 for 1, then it's usually the attackers that's going to take the upper hand. But of course, when you're looking at the game, there's a lot more into the game that could happen, that could change that course and change the outcome. But it's all these things that you have to think about at the same time too, right? And then I don't really, me myself, when I'm looking at this as well, is this mini-map, and I'm also looking at a lot of these abilities because I want to focus on what do they have to actually prevent the attackers from getting into the A site, at least in that example. Does that make sense? Perfect. Here it says that I speak in the past and I predict the future. That's basically when we're looking at the play-by-play, they're speaking more towards the present time, right? So 3 players setting up towards the A site. They're actually going to try to move in with potentially, let's say, a recon dart into the A site, and you have 2 defenders holding up the A site for Team Gambit, right? As a color commentator, I say, well, they actually do have a possibility of actually retaliating back with potential cloudbursts into the wall to hide out the recon dart, and also the Jet with the op could potentially just go for an early pick and dash away. Simple things like that, but I'm predicting of what could happen. And as Sapphire said, it's okay to predict, and it's also okay to not necessarily always be right. You know, you could be wrong on what you're trying to predict at the same time because that's what Sean Garris also looks at when he's actually doing these colors. Go ahead.
Yeah, in your own personal opinion and your experience as a caster, how much of it do you talk about the past and analyze, and how much do you predict? Because ideally, there's scenarios where I want to connect them together, but there's scenarios where I want to separate them.
Yeah, so I think there's great moments. That's a great question as well, is when do you talk about the past, when do you want to talk about what's about to happen, and when do you want to analyze and when do you want to predict? For me, my main formula that I base upon when I'm actually starting my broadcast as a color commentator is in the freeze time, when let's say my play-by-play is going to say, okay, there's a setup with 3 players heading up towards the A site. This is sorry, let me back pace a little bit. In the pistol round like this, you're probably going to start predicting right away because nothing happened in the past, right? So let's say we get into round number 2. We talk about the Hiko clutch 2 versus 1. Myself as a color commentator, I would probably do a summary of the last few moments of like what are the key moments of that previous round that allowed for a team to take the upper hand. Right? So it's not necessarily on the last 2 kills. It could be positioning on one of the players. It could be the abilities that were used by the players as well to make sure that they hold that defense to make that round successful for that winning team, right? I would probably take about 5 to 7 seconds, if I can, to do that quick summarization. Then I'll actually move over within that freeze time again, depending how much time we use in our previous time, to start presenting on what's coming up next. If it's not going to be my play-by-play commentator that's going to say, hey, it's a 3-player setup now towards the A site, I want to make sure that I present that as well, and that according to the second round, let's say it's the pistol round, or sorry, the eco round, so you have a gun round coming in for the attack, an eco round for the defense, then technically you could say, look, there's 3 players working towards the A site, there's only 2 players there, it's not looking good for the defense. And just that simple setup as well is good enough as a color commentator to just set that up, because that's going to allow your play-by-play to start taking that microphone and start describing that too. And while he does that, and she does that, you have then a chance to like observe what everything else is happening around. Go ahead here, Mimi.
I'll grab that. I think it's also like, you don't want to lean too much into the predictions. I think maybe a better word than predictions is setting win conditions for the next round, because that's a big one, because that allows your play-by-play to bounce off of you a lot better if you can set, because if you have a desk with you too, or if you have a good amount of time for your pre-show, you're setting these overall win cons.
Of course.
For a team like Sentinels, maybe it's like a 10s pop-off or something like that.
Yep.
But in specific rounds, there's win conditions as well, like a hero rifle, or there's a bladestorm or something
Exactly.
like that. And you don't always have to be the big brain. You don't also always have to have the prediction. It's just like giving the audience something to focus on for the next round, because there's so much going on in Valorant. It's nice to be able to focus that attention on something big.
Definitely, especially when it comes down to just learning the game right now, or trying to get to the level, for example, where Sean's at. If you're gonna try to like over-predict or try to study too much out of it, you might burn yourself out, or just you might give up right in the middle of a broadcast when you realize, okay, well, everything that I've studied for so long, everything that I predicted might not work too well on how this match is going on, which is a great point that Mimi brings. And that comes with experience and time. Once you're getting more used to like watching VODs, for example, and you're starting to see more tendencies of how teams are currently playing, then you might have a better idea later on to start bringing those predictions in, right? But if not, there's always layers on how you want to work your color commentary on first hand. And like I said, the simple things that we talked about in the beginning. What do they have available in terms of ultimates, for example? What do they have in terms of abilities? How can that work out within the play is definitely going to help out. You don't always have to predict. Yes, Sierra.
I have a question going back to, because you were talking about like as a color commentator, if you're talking and then all of a sudden you see like there's action, be like, okay, 3 looking towards A, to then put it back to the play-by-play.
Yeah.
I come from a game where like obviously it's
Cut,
not
cut,
back and forth,
cookie
it's
cut.
cut.
Yes.
It's cut. So it's like Valorant has obviously been a little bit of struggle in that sort of sense.
Yeah.
But I was curious too, as a color, is there ever moments where you go a little into that play-by-play because of where the timing was thrown back, or is it more so you always try and toss it?
So this all depends on the experience that you have as a color commentator and the experience that you have as a duo as well. I'll talk about it in the next slide, but for me personally, I find it very, very, very important to find a duo to work with and to continue to push to make sure that you have this duo that's going to stay together, right? And if you're comfortable with that person to work as a duo, you want to try to push so that you guys stay together. Because if you're going to start breaking out or working with different people all the time, then you have to learn their style all the time too, and you don't get to develop yourselves as a duo, right? So just to take that was a forward step, now to take a step back on the question as well. Me personally, I get to a point where, for example, if I cast it with Uber, who's a well-known caster in Overwatch League, and we did a broadcast together in Valorant last January, I am comfortable enough to see when the action is coming, because I know that it's about to come, and just say one sentence and pass it back to Uber, and he's going to take it right away. With other casters, I might take a little bit of the play-by-play so that I could at least finish my point and my sentence. Like sometimes you just got to flip that switch. One thing that you're going to notice when you're going to be broadcasting in Valorant is that there's just so much happening around the map that sometimes you just have to pick and choose your battles. And even with that point that you choose, you might not always be able to get it across because you don't want to lose the pace of what's happening in the action already. So you finish your sentence as fast as you can or as easily as you can, switch over to that play-by-play, looks like the action's coming now, oh my god, Hiko just got the first kill, boom, and then pass it to your play-by-play so that the play-by-play can start bringing up that action, and you don't break the flow of who's doing the play-by-play and who's doing color.
Even if it's like an awkward, like, you know, because sometimes like games are funky, like
yeah.
all of a sudden like there's something that happens and then it seems dead for a while, so it kind of gets tossed back, but then like something unexpected happens.
Yeah.
And only like the color commentator has to say like one thing. Do you still like then just like toss it back, or do you use it kind of like, oh well, we're not sure if this is gonna like actually?
You'll probably have to finish it. So at that point, so for example, and I'll get right to you after. So for example, if it gets to the point where there's a rotation that's happening and you're getting into your color casting, but somehow the flank came faster than you expected and the kill's already happening, and you know the round's about to finish because those trades are going to come instantly by looking at the minimap and looking at the rest of the screen, I would probably finish the round. And then within that freeze time, you try to find a way, like for example, for me, I'd probably still continue to just recap that round real quick so I could give it back to my play-by-play, so we kind of like reset that tonality and our roles at the same time. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead. Two hands.
Oh, you had one as well, Mimi?
2 hands.
Did you have something as well?
Dan might say what else.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say in terms of timing, because this is the thing that I've struggled with. I also come from a game where very
Yes.
clear cut.
Yes.
So for Valorant, I definitely had some issues with this, and I talked to Sasha about it too, because that was like the main thing of our conversation. I was like, please help me out, because I'm not sure when I should talk.
Yeah.
And my thing here is that I don't have a set duo as well, and I know that would help me a bunch in terms of this, but when I am casting, I hate only talking when the fight is over. Like, I love bringing a little bit of action or talking in the middle when there's like a rotation going on.
Yes.
And usually when I'm casting with someone new, or the people that I'm casting I don't have a lot of experience casting with, they always fall into, they will take us to the entire fight, to the entire round, and I only talk when it's over, and I only have
well,
like
that's actually an example of somebody who's inexperienced, actually, if they're taking the whole round in terms of casting and play-by-play. So we'll look at it into the next slide, but there's a way that I actually see like a basis of how we could pass the mic in between the play-by-play and the color when we're looking at a round more specifically. We'll check it into the next round, see if it actually answers your question, and if we want to develop into that, we definitely could.
Yeah.
Okay? Mimi, you were going to say something, or?
Just go to your next slide. Okay. I'll let it keep moving. I'll let it keep moving.
Okay. So at least before we get into the next slide, let's get into this point over here where the color plays along with the tonality of the play-by-play. So basically, if the play-by-play is about to go into a hype piece, and oh my god, he just got 2 kills, and it's going to be the round for 100 Thieves. And then me as a color commentator, I'll be like, oh my god, what a round coming in for 100 Thieves, a clutch in from Hiko. But suddenly I'm going to try to bring the tonality down so it can reset into this, into like this arc, right? I usually call it the hyperbole, but there's a lot of them that happen within a round, and there's a lot of it that happens within a game. And it's not always like, when you're at the peak, for me personally, it doesn't always necessarily mean that it's a hype kill, or it's a nice 2K, or it's a nice 3K. So for example, if I'm going to look at explaining a little bit like the explanation of how they're being set up. So I get into like, okay, there's 3 players that's setting up towards the attacker side. What's going to happen out of this? And then I could just take that and say, they're possibly going to do a recon dart to try to clear out the A side and try to get an attack right after, right? I didn't go into any peak. My play-by-play didn't go into any peak. And then once that's done, the play-by-play could actually start getting into the action. Then a new curve comes up, because that's when the action's going to start coming. That's when the first kills are going to happen. So you kind of have like lots of these ways, and it's different peaks going from action to action. Does that make sense? Awesome. And here, of course, is more of the subject matter expert instead of being the hype woman or the hype man, because you really want to try to break down these plays, and you also want to do your best to keep the audience engaged into like understanding from like a micro or macro level how that round panned out, right? Which is why, as Mimi mentioned before, you don't always have to predict, but if you're able to explain it well, it's also good enough when you want to start to have kind of like a recap type style of color commentating, right? So explaining what went well, what didn't go well, okay? So I just talked about it. So I just put them side to side so you could see the comparison, and this is where I gave that example of like that bell curve, not the hyperbole, right? So the bell curve of going up and down on different waves, okay? Any questions on this so far, Mimi?
I just wanted to add something, I guess,
Yeah,
because
please.
there's a, like, I always say roller coaster instead of bell curve.
Of course, yeah.
I like the word roller coaster, but I think there's a roller coaster to a map and to a series of the energy. And
Yes.
normally it's going to build up, and then you have like the big peak, and then you have the wind, whatever. And if there's
Yeah,
a comeback, that's another hill valley, which kind of affects all of it. But the round also has it, so you kind of have to think this round has this certain energy, and I think energy management is, I mean, it's everything.
It's huge.
It's
Yeah.
huge, but play-by-play is normally the one leading that energy management. It's just as a color, you have to make sure you match.
You follow it,
because
yeah.
some of the, like, you can really easily, even if you're like a massive brain, this is why a lot of pro players that are super smart sometimes struggle with commentary, because there's a big hype moment, and they're just like, yeah.
And you don't know where to time.
Awesome,
Exactly.
it's like everything is that pacing, and
Exactly.
because it can ruin a viewer experience.
So even as a color commentator, I think most of us will be heard like around here or here in terms of like this roller coaster, right?
Yeah.
Because they're actually helping out, setting up the play. So we talked about what can the attackers, what can the defenders do as we're about to get into the action. Play-by-play starts picking up the action a bit. The action is done, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the round is done, right? This could only be the first kill, for example. Then it technically passes back to the color commentator to explain what just happened, how that kill went on. And now that it's a 5 versus 4 for X team, how does that fourth player, or the team with 4 players, pull back into the game? You go back and down this curve in explanation, and it resets back up here until you get into what I like to call freeze time. You know what? Agents like freeze time, so we'll get into that, right? So we'll talk about it right now. So we get here into the baseline of commentary between both casters, and this is why I have 2 stars. Is actually in my speaker's notes, again, talking about how important it is to have a duo to be able to work with. Because once you get the basis of this is where you could actually start developing your style a little bit more, understanding when the mic should be passed a little bit more, and understanding each other's style, so you also have ample amount of time on the microphone as your as your co-caster, sorry. And one more thing I wanted to add in terms of microphone time. I am not a firm believer that it has to be a 50-50 in terms of the airtime that you have between your play-by-play and your color commentator. It could also be a nice 60-40 for your play-by-play. It could be a 70-30. It just depends what your style is going to be with your co-caster. So for example, with me and Uber Shouts, it's a lot of like fast cookie cut kind of thing, because we know when to pass the mic. When the action is going to be slightly low, it's my turn to speak. When the action is about to come, I pass it to Uber, and we go back and forth this way. For Sean and for DDK, for example, there are 2 commentators that are, you know, they both have big brains, right? They like to nerd out about the rounds. They like to nerd out about the plays, and they'll have more like this conversation type of style going into their broadcasting, where Sean is going to be able to predict those plays, be able to talk about all these abilities that could happen, and then Dan kind of like talks into that as soon as the action starts. Though he switches right away into the play-by-play, but they're also having more of a conversation going into the broadcast. So it's like you're kind of like following that story with them from a more like laid-back style in my eyes. More than anything else, right? So you have different styles. There's not only one set play or one set way to do it, but with your own personality, your own way that you work your chemistry with your co-caster is how you develop your branding around that too. Okay? So let's start here with the baseline. So we're starting even with round number 1. So the agent select, we didn't even get into the pistol round yet. You see that main screen, you see like agents on one side for the attackers, agents on one side for the defenders. What do you think the play-by-play could talk about here, starting this up, and how do they set up the color commentator, and what can a color commentator say? Let's start with that. Mimi?
I mean, play-by-play can point out anything that's unorthodox, unusual, differs from normal tendencies, set their color up. But I mean, it's just like in the round. If you're a play-by-play, you don't want to over-guide your color caster, set up a general question that gives you an opportunity to talk, and yet let them yap. I think generally as well, as a color or as a play-by-play, you want to give as much time to your color here as possible. Make it feel human, like make it feel back and forth, like ping off each other when it sounds like a conversation. This is the time to do it. This is the time to just nerd out and have that discussion, and especially where colors can thrive if the play-by-play is asking just nice open-ended questions to allow it.
Correct. Anybody else have anything else to add? Sierra?
Yeah, I kind of think for agent select too, like, but for like the play-by-play can kind of like point out like, and not even like tell the color commentator what they'd be talking about, but if like you see one comp is like super, super aggressive and one's more so defensive, kind of like saying for the audience, so they kind of, because like you can't assume that they know what's up, so you're like, oh, like this composition here, like we see there's like 3 duelists going into this, and like then the color commentator can go in off of that after you've just kind of pointed out simple dot blank, like for what the audience can look out for.
For sure. And Dan?
Yeah, the way that I see it too, I never thought of like the play-by-play setting me up as a color to talk about it, but I always felt of it like a conversation where, of course, I'm talking most of the time analyzing the agent select, but at the same time, I always feel like a back and forth of my play-by-play also giving a little bit of his opinion or giving some thoughts.
For sure. Yeah, agreed. And that's where, as Mimi was mentioning like 2 slides before, or 1 slide before, about the winning conditions, right? So for example, when we're looking at what is happening in Berlin, what's happening in Iceland, you had the deaths that happened all the time before, like, hey, there's the story building already that Rivington was talking about too, those hero players that you could build up and start talking about those, right? Is Hiko still going to be playing a Sova on this map, or is he switching over to a Viper? How has he been playing Viper in the past? All that type of stuff in terms of those winning conditions that's talked about at the analyst desk, or even it might be your job talking about the winning conditions in your own analysis before going to these games, because when we go into online, it's basically just you and your you and your co-caster talking from time to time too.
There was a thing that I noticed that was happening, I believe, for Last Chance Qualifier.
Yeah.
That the hosts were talking during the agent select. And I found that interesting because, you know, as a color, this is the scenario where I like to set up what I want to talk about, the storyline that we talked about yesterday. But is there any reason behind that, of the host talking? Or what is your own opinion on that?
I think it kind of started adopting what kind of like EU is kind of doing as well, where they have the analyst desk and also the host doing all the agent select, the map picks and stuff like that too. I think it's great, actually, because it gives you the firm break to say that for the commentators, their job right now is the game's about to start, you get in and you bring the action, right? And the job of both of the casters will then to start explaining or confirming if the storytelling or the setup and the winning conditions talked about at the analyst desk is currently being applied within the game, right? But there's also within the game itself, if you had your own winning conditions and stuff that you studied on, you could always bring that up within your cast as well, right? So especially in agent select, it's like, I love what Bala said in the analyst desk about Hiko, but I also think about Asuna right now as that Reyna that dropped like a 48 kills on Icebox before. I wonder if he's also going to be that winning condition for 100 Thieves, right? So you could always bring that up and bring different topics. And now as the audience, when they're going to listen to the game and watch the game with you, there's going to be more pointers that they can look at and pay attention to them when they're watching the game. Especially for a new audience or a new viewer that comes into this and has no idea what the hell's going on, at least they'll be able to see the name. And then they're like, oh, Asuna, they talked about him in the broadcast. They talked about him before the agent select. Let me see if they're actually able to, or if he's able to actually do what the analyst or even the color commentator said, right? So it's a great way to engage the audience too. Did you have anything else, Mimi?
You said what I said.
Boom. That's why you're a color commentator. Okay, so there, we got to the agent select, who to look out for, what to look out for. So these are also other examples, right, that you could talk about during the agent select. But you really just want to set the tone, set the pace, and set the stage as the action's about to unravel, right? Then, of course, in the first round, you get into the pistol round. Basically, it's the beautiful cinematic shot that we see from Yeti and from the observers that are currently doing it. The play-by-play will be like, well, now it's time here. The grand finals pistol round between 100 Thieves and Gambit. This is for all the marbles. Who's going to make it into champions in Berlin in December, right? And then here you could actually now look at the color commentator and start to talk about the winning condition. But what I mean about this section is not about the winning condition about the whole game. It's what's happening right now in the first few seconds of the round. So let's take, for example, a map like Haven, right? What's usually going to happen towards Haven right now in agent compositions? You usually have maybe 2 initiators right now in this current meta on October 19th, 2021. Just want to make sure because we got a camera with dates. So you have like basically a Sky and a Silva, a double initiator. It's going to be very important into like map control, map information in a map. Where does the action usually start in the first seconds of Haven? The A choke point on that side. Right? So the winning condition is, okay, well, is the Silva going to start droning towards this area? Is there a jet actually in their composition that's going to do the cloud burst and try to gain map control down towards sewers, right? We're looking at the attack here. Then on the defender side is, what does the defender have to try to counteract? We actually have a Silva down towards that long A by that orb. he could actually recon dart back into the A choke point. Very, very standard play right now from the initiator, right? What else did they have? Oh, they had that Skye on defender side too? Well, she's going to start the Trailblazer down towards sewers. And now, as a color commentator, you could try to look at this and say, is this going to be a stalemate in terms of the matches? How is it currently developing? Has anyone gained any of that map control on either side at the beginning of the first 5-10 seconds of the round, right? And as the play-by-play is talking about that and you're thinking about that, when he passes or she passes the mic back over to you, then you could start talking about that, right? Here's my observation. Nothing happened. It's a stalemate. Nobody took ground control. Are they going to try to reset somewhere else? Oh, look, on the other side of the map, the lurk is happening towards long C. They're going to try to get an opening on C side. Those are little predictions too, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be like going 5 or 6 steps ahead. Just that one little thing to change into the analysis to say, okay, is that going to be that winning condition now for the attacker side for them to gain that portion of that map and pass it back to the play-by-play to talk about? Yes, Dan? If I'm going too fast, by the way, let me know, because I haven't done my breathing techniques, so I'm running out of breath as I'm speaking.
So I had a question about that specifically, pistol round and the first ones that we see.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when I cast a lot when the meta is the same, I feel repetitive from cast to cast on the first rounds because everyone's usually playing kind of very similar, and you already know how the first and second round are probably going to go. So I don't know, like, is that bad? Because
it's not bad.
It's a standard, right? Like, you already know what's going to happen.
It's a standard, but it's also at the same time, like, 2 different things. Like, the first one is any new viewer that comes into a game for the first time will not know that. So it's always good to reiterate that first. But also, if you're looking at how the play style is currently being played by X team, like we know that there's a base, that recon dart is always going to come in towards that A choke point, right? And we know that because it's always repeated every time we watch Haven. But what else does the team bring outside of that recon dart that's a little bit different? Is it going to be somebody else that's lurking more towards the B side? Is there going to be a push outside that map as well? Is there going to be more aggression down towards long C at the beginning that's not currently being seen from the point of view of a spectator? But you as a color commentator looked at this minimap, at the radar on the top, and you're seeing this action unravel. So it's not necessarily now your focus on looking at that choke point, but it's also like, yeah, it was a standard here, but you see this push coming down from the long C side. And then hopefully, if your observer is also listening, they could switch over to that and get into that action too. Because we talked about the teamwork and the story building between your observer and the casters. That could also be one of those other things. Because there's always little micro things, right? If everybody was playing the same strat, you'd probably get overtime every single game, right? So there's got to be some more that's being anti-strat, being practiced, that allows for one team to take a better upper hand. And it's our job as a color commentator to pay attention to that and try to decipher that as well as we're looking through it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so we talked about the winning condition here. So this was basically the color commentator speaking. And then it goes into the play-by-play, right? So we talked about, okay, here are the potential abilities that could happen towards the A choke point of sewers or A-long on Haven. And then now it's actually the play-by-play going, well, Owl Drone is now coming out. Cloudburst coming out as well towards the cross to allow the jet to dash down towards sewers. And here comes the Trailblazer back on the defender side, and everything's canceled, right? So now it's that play-by-play that's going back into explaining this bell curve a little bit too, or the roller coaster in terms of the action and description, right? Then once that first action is done, I call this the come down, right? Because it's for you now as a color commentator to match the tonality of your co-caster and start bringing it down, or even maybe bring it even higher. Because what if there's a big fight that's actually happening right now too at the same time, right? So yeah, there's a little bit of a sewers action right now, but look at this big flank coming from behind. And then back to the play-by-play, he could actually bring that right away, because as you have information on that mini-map, you know that action is going to be happening very soon. So you could actually ramp that up really quick, and that sets up your play-by-play at the same time too. So they could actually start already at 60% out of 100 in terms of like the pacing and the tonality, right? And not just always have to reset down at the bottom, okay? And then and this could also happen as the come down is in other areas, because it kind of like goes back and forth, right? We talked about how it keeps going back and forth. Another example of the come down is when you have, now let's call this second interaction. There is actually finally a set execution from the attacker side into a site, and the play-by-play is going crazy and bringing all the action. But that's just like the first like 2 versus 2 into the site, 3 versus 2 into the site. The action's done, And then now as a color commentator, you get to analyze what just happened. What was that key winning moment, the key winning condition into that set execution that allowed the attackers, 100 Thieves, to overtake the site? Once that's done though, technically there's still 2 other players rotating on the defender side from A side, from B side into C. It's time to play the retake, right? So you get back to the bottom of re-explaining, okay, well, the people retaking the site, who do we have? Oh, we still have a Sova. They still have a recon dart. They still have smokes. They still have a jet with a jet dash. So you're setting up that play into the next moment of the round. Your play-by-play takes it, ends up the round, and then you get into the buy time. You don't have to reset all the way from the beginning to explain everything that just happened in the whole round because you won't have enough time. So it gets into like the final moments. Okay, what was that key moment? What was that key play going into a retake for the defenders? How did they win the round? And then you go into explaining the setup into the next round, and you rinse and repeat for the rest. Any questions on this so far? Right? Got our thumbs up from Mimi. She approves. Let's go, team. So, yeah, of course, I have to make sure that we show one of the greats that unfortunately we lost last week. But one of the greats and an example for duos is Kickstar and Intero, right? What's really good about this duo is the game itself is so freaking long to listen to, because in a round itself, you have operator select. After your operator select, you have what they call a 6-pick, which means one team can now choose, switch out an operator and choose another one, and the other team cannot see it. So you go into another analytical round to be like, okay, well, or analytical moment to say, okay, what's this operator going to bring right now? How is it going to counter the other one? Then you get into the prep phase. How are the defenders setting up? How are the attackers setting up? How's the droning phase happening right now, where they're basically trying to figure out where the sites are, where they could defuse actually the spike, or should I say the bomb in this case. And then Intero, his job, of course, is to play-by-play. But what's really good from Michael is that he was an ex-pro player too, so he understands all the nitty-gritty behind it, so it allows for him to just take all that time in the world to really allow for us to absorb all the strategies, how all the plays are happening from the attackers, and Intero just, or not attackers, but from the game, and Intero just brings out the action. And he's such a good storyteller too, which is why, of course, they won Esports Award of the Year in terms of play-by-play and color caster in last year, if I'm not mistaken, right? I think these are, this is a duo of a great example. Another one, of course, we all know Brennan Sideshow, at least for a couple of us, but we were asking before what's Plat Chat, right? So these guys are actually very known in the Overwatch scene, being like one of the mainstays, the main duos of the Overwatch League. Another great two is, of course, Ubershouts and Mr. X. And Bren is basically our play-by-play commentator, being that hype. And I find that this, when we, at least for me, I listened to the Overwatch League finals a couple of weeks ago, and I find that their cookie-cutting ways, or the way that they pass the mic, is very similar to what we could do in Valorant as well, in terms of like the action, because the action could just ramp up right away, you never know. So they're doing really good to allow some breathing room for Sideshow, for example, to just talk about that little play, and he's going to talk about the next ult that's about to happen, the next move that's coming out, a hero change into one of the players, and says this is going to make it or break it at this point, and bring it back to Bren so he can start talking about the action. So they're really good at passing the mic, and this is another duo that I probably recommend for you to check out if you want to learn about duos in different games and see how maybe you could apply that into Valorant too. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, for me, starting with Overwatch, that was the duo that I was looking to, because they're obviously, like, their analysis is amazing. The play-by-play is always on point. But on top of that, it can feel like they are friends, and you feel that connection, and I feel like that is why it's so important to get someone to work with constantly, because it really makes a difference. They make jokes in the middle when they have the time to do so, and it's completely different to a scenario where you feel like sometimes you listen to someone and you know that they're very like super serious, not a lot of synergy going on, but for them, I think that's the biggest thing going on.
Exactly, because it's not awkward when you're trying to pull out jokes, right? You know that they're going to be able to tag along. They know each other's personalities, which is why, for example, Pansy and Hypok are another great too in terms of like being able to kid around and stuff like that. Even Mitchman and Tom Biz are really good at joking around in the middle of a broadcast because they know each other's personalities. So again, the importance of duos at this point. Then you have me. Little old me in 2003, casting some Counter-Strike 1.6 in the LAN. Who's my duo? I don't have I changed? I haven't changed, really. Yeah, so basically this was CPL Summer 2003 in Dallas, Texas, and this was so new. Esports didn't exist yet. It was called competitive gaming. And this is basically all behind us. Everybody brought their own PCs, right? It was called BYOCs, bring your own computers. And it just had this huge ass LAN. And then we were there broadcasting audio only for people to listen online. And back then when it was a success, it was basically about 40 live listeners onto a broadcast, which is totally different in terms of metrics of today. But for me, I'm in the same point of as all you guys. I don't really have a set duo right now, right? And I currently have chosen the path of being color commentator because before I got into Valorant, I was mainly a play-by-play caster in Counter-Strike. But then I realized that there was a shortage in color commentators in Valorant. So I decided to switch over to Valorant, and switch over to Valorant, but also color commentating, so I could actually start maybe helping out a play-by-play to give them success. And I actually started really liking color commentary actually too. And one extra role that I didn't really talk about, of course, is going to be the analyst desk, right? I think that if you're actually really good on color commentating, you could also do a very good job on the analyst desk. The difference right now between color commentary for me and the analyst desk is that the analyst desk, basically you're trying to summarize everything that happened within like, I don't know, a minute or 2 minutes of airtime, because here in North America, you don't have that much time to speak when it's your turn to speak with like a 3-4 person desk, right? So very similar to color commentating, you have to pick and choose what are those winning conditions, what are those key moments, who's the player that you want to highlight that you have within your 2 minutes to go into your analysis, right? But going through all of that, if it's going to be Asuna, well, within all the 24 rounds that we just watched of Valorant on that previous matchup, what in those 24 rounds did Asuna do very well that I want to highlight him on the analyst desk, right? So you could think about that a little bit more if analyst is something you're looking to choose. Okay? Any questions so far? All good, FNS. So prepping for events, I'm going to skim through this a bit too. I only have screenshots right now, but I just wanted to explain to you all how I actually start prepping for events, right? So websites such as VLR.gg or despite.gg is actually very good to look at what we have over here, the stats section. So within the stats section, I could choose how far back I want to go towards these dates. Usually I try to go maybe about 1 or 2 months, maybe 3 months before I prep for an event. Because sometimes there's some teams that haven't played in like 60 days at all, right? And there's some teams that have played in 30 days, some teams that haven't played within 90 days because they haven't been qualifying in our cutthroat system right now of the open circuit. So as you look at these, as you click like, for example, a date, there's going to be like a drop down that comes down of all their records on every single map and what agent composition they've been using throughout the past tournaments. It'll show you which tournaments that they played in, what tournament they used that composition in, and I use that to create this. So if you want to look at it, it's a little bit confusing at first, but I'll explain it so you could see, right? So what I have towards that top, for example here, this is me talking about Cloud9 again. I look back towards their stats from July 21st, or 22nd, 2021, and we have a little bit of the Stage 3 Challengers 2 and the Nursery Gamer stats. So this is actually what I had preparing for Cloud9 going into the last chance qualifier of last week. So I know that most recently is I highlight a different color, whatever color you guys want. But if it's within that same event, I have it all under that same color. So they use 3 different agent compositions on Ascent for the Nursery Gamers Championships. But if I go over here, it has a darker orange because this is Challengers 2 Stage 3 in terms of that color coding, so I know what agent composition to use back then. So within the NSG Summer Champs, they use 2 compositions on Icebox, they use 2 composition on Breeze, and usually under the agents, I have their scoring, right? So how they played against each of the teams. So I kind of know, okay, 5-0, who did they actually beat on the 5-0? And these are just stats that I put here and there that if I want to mention later on in a broadcast, if it's important and relevant for me to bring up, maybe I'll do it. But most of the times I don't because, you know, who cares that they beat Ukers 13-10, right? Yes, go ahead, Jody. Oh, the mic? Yeah, right there, yeah.
Do you have like this with you when you're casting?
I think I have it in an email that I sent it to Cozy Josie as she wanted that, so I could email it to you guys for sure.
And I mean, like when you're up and you're.
Oh, great question. Yeah, so I actually just invested most recently into a MacBook Pro, or not a MacBook Pro, sorry, the iPad Pro.
iPad?
So I could actually have like these sheets with me.
Okay.
So when I actually cast it with Rivington last week, I actually clicked really quick. Okay, Gen G, what map did we have? How did they play? What was the agent comp, right?
Okay.
And then I went from there. So the reason why I put the latest one at the top is probably because I believe that it's going to be the agent composition that they will choose within that matchup, right? The older ones, usually it's going to be a little bit too dated, but it gives you an idea of how it evolved, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll pass it to Mimi first, and then I got you, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just also just important to say that everyone does this differently and has
Of course.
different ways of portraying the exact same information. For
Yeah.
me, it's a lot better for me to take handwritten notes because
Yes.
I remember better, and I think it's easier for me to have it with me because you can easily transfer it to a cue card or whatever
course.
for the pertinent information you need. Like I take my notes, like I write it like with a pen on an iPad,
Yeah.
just so I can have it digitally, but I can still like have the physical feeling of
course.
writing, which is really, really nice.
Yeah.
Because then what I do is when I have the maps, I can have my specific map notes on a tab based off of that. So I can have like my tendencies and then like my more general stats.
Correct.
And I don't even ever really look back at it. It's just like
It's good to
writing
have.
it down commits it to my memory. I don't remember the last time I actually looked back at my notes. It's just
Yeah.
like when you actually do that method of writing. I sound like a teacher right now. But like the more I always write everything down twice that I want to learn for broadcast because then it just sticks in my head.
Yeah, no, it's a great way. Everybody prepares really differently, right? We can pass it to Dan and I'll get it to you.
Sorry.
Darling. No, no worries, no worries, no worries, no worries.
Yeah, I also kind of do a little bit of both. So
Yeah.
the general notes or things that I'm working on in my cast, I have them written down in actually I have them in my computer, I type them. But for the match itself, I do write it down in like sticky notes and I
Yeah.
put them in my, but I do want to ask, I know this depends a lot on the caster, but
Yeah.
for you, what is your average preparation time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Mine's about 60 hours a week. I'm a perfectionist when it comes to this kind of things, and which is
Yeah.
why when I talk about my style of like the prediction thing that Mimi says you don't always have to, which I totally agree, you don't have to, but I do want to be the best. So for me to be the best, because let's face it, anybody that's currently presenting or being in front of a camera, we do have some sort of ego, right? But for me personally, I change that ego into confidence, where like by being over prepared for all the preparations that I do, it helps me be more confident to predict the play that's going to happen. So understanding the tendencies, like how did they play with this double duelist before on Icebox? How did they play with a Viper in the composition, for example? All these things of Cloud9 and the evolution of that, I can now see in a newer matchup, are they using a strat, are they using a comm that's older? If they use a comm that's older, I already have some footage on that, so it's nothing that, there's a possibility that there's something that's not new that I'm familiar with that I could talk about, and I could be confident and talk about that because I know those tendencies and those styles.
Yeah, and I think also as a color caster, I mean, our job is to analyze everything. So
Yes.
the more knowledge, the more in depth that you can go with your casting.
Nothing goes to waste
So-
when you're watching these VODs.
Yeah.
Nothing ever goes to waste. Go ahead, Mimi.
For me, I think I try and be a little more direct because I just watch every event live
Yep.
that I can and
Yeah.
just take notes. Just generally, I'm not looking for anything. It's just
For sure.
I see something cool, I'm writing that down. When I'm actually preparing for an event, I'd say I probably take like just a day per team, like full like 7-8 hour day just for every team. I watch at least one of every single map that they actively play.
Yep.
And I try and watch 2 of their main maps, write down every composition, and just do specific notes on like every player's tendencies,
Exactly.
who the player to watch on every map is, because you can never be too prepared.
Exactly. So just to get back on that too, that's great. That's a great point because that's what I do as well. But instead of being handwritten, I have these compositions on an Excel sheet. But then when I start watching VODs, I don't watch them live because I don't have time. But I try to rewatch them later on so I could prep. And the notes that I add on top of this is I usually have a Word document too.
Yeah.
And I start writing down those tendencies onto that as well. And that helps you in terms of memorizing a little bit and have that a little bit more ingrained. And I also have color coding if I want to look quickly, right? When I have this on a broadcast desk and they're like, okay, well, what do they usually play? So I have like a dark orange for duelists. I have this greenish hue for initiators. And I have this mustard color for sentinels. And then controllers on blue.
Yeah.
So it's just for me, my preferences of looking at these colors, I know exactly what I have. Okay?
Can I-
Yes,
yeah,
go
let me
ahead. Oh,
just say
sorry, I
one
think I
thing
skipped your question, right?
Yeah, you got egoed.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted
Go
to
ahead,
say
darling.
one
Go ahead
thing
after,
quickly.
after Mimi, darling.
I just wanted to say it's also like if color commentary is the thing you really want to get into or analytical stuff, you don't have to watch every single game from every single region, but it's really, really helpful to watch
Yes.
the other regions. I've been watching a lot of EU LCQ.
Yep.
I've tried to watch a lot of the Southeast Asia stuff just because other teams are watching that. Pro players
Correct.
are watching that and they steal stuff from other regions. And if you can get ahead of that, you can really
Exactly.
get those predictions.
That's why it's also, and just to tag on before I pass it to you, darling, is like, for example, like Vision Strikers with the flash and dash of back in the beta days. They were
international.
exactly right, and they were the first one that brought that up, and even Absolute Jupiter, who are now Zeta Division, who are now whatever the team's going to be because that blew up. They actually like coined that flash and dash, and then suddenly Like some coaches in North America started watching these games and they brought it up, and we're in a region like, holy shit, where did that come from? We never knew that, but it was very, very common in the other regions. So one definition, for example, for the Brazilian scene is that they're usually very, very aggressive, right? Where they always talk about this whole W, kind of like this aggressive type of play style. And you could actually see that, in, for example, if you're going to see a double duelist set up here, is it going to be very similar to like the Brazilian scene of how they're doing it and how are they doing it differently? So watching VODs from other regions will definitely also help, and which is why it adds up to that 60 hours, right? It's just not only NA. I have 60 hours, but like 90% of that time is still just on NA, but I'm trying to find more time to watch the other regions too.
It's really tiring.
You need some, not necessarily coffee, do some exercise, stay hydrated so that you could actually, yeah, it does make you pretty tired. Go ahead, darling.
All right. Hold on. Okay. So do you just gather, like, you don't try to, like, get, you know, every single map and every single agent that they've played on that particular map? You just get, like, kind of like you tally up what agent they play the most on that one map, and then you put that on the graph, or?
Oh, no, this is actually their actual agent composition on a certain event. So these two were just on the Nerd Street Gamer Summer Champ. This one, which probably has more at the bottom, is the agent composition that they use during Challengers 2 Stage 3. So there could be at some point where, for example, maybe there was a KO played in here. I'm like, okay, well, KO, I was on that copium a lot about the KO being utilized and he was going to be a great agent. But then most likely during NALCQ, we're not going to see any KO, so I don't really add that into there if it was like 2 events in the past, right? But I do backtrack to about 2 events before, up to 2 events before the main event that they're going to play against, just to see if there's going to be something different, right? And the reason why I write these down, I don't necessarily watch all the matches from the previous events. It's just I know now the tendencies. Okay, well, if it's a jet and it's going to be a sky, how did they flash and dash, for example, on a map like, I don't know, Haven, right? And see if it's actually been utilized on their most recent composition too, if they're still using those 2 agents. If they don't, how are they playing this a little bit more differently, right? And then going into the next event that's coming up, are they using the same comp? Are they using something different? But after understanding how they currently play with this composition, if there's something different, I could then, as a color commentator or an analyst, for example, try to theory craft what could be different on how it's currently being played versus how they played before. Which is also really great when we're looking at color commentary when watching a live game. All those questions that you're asking when you're actually watching these VODs and preparing for it, and you're seeing something different, that's basically your job of color commentary, because you're like, okay, well, what do we think is going to be different with this new agent comp? And then you start looking at these points when you're watching the game, and you're looking at that radar and see if it makes sense of what you're theory crafting, because that will also help into building your confidence as well in color commentary. Okay. Yeah.
Was it Tony or was me? Okay.
Yeah, it's you, Dan.
Yeah, and there was something that Mimi said that I wanted to add to, because the thing about studying other regions that actually came out to be super useful to me when I was doing Overwatch last year.
Yep.
So I did contenders in Spanish, and in one of my analyses, I was like, oh, this is a very similar composition to what they're doing in one of the teams in Korea right now. Where there's like the double bubble composition, and I went into detail about it. And it was kind of usually what I do. And then a couple of months after, it was like Gauntlet happening, and they were like, one of the things that they mentioned when they brought me into doing Gauntlet was like, oh, we really like the fact that it really shows that you watch a lot of broadcasts in a lot of other regions. So
it makes you sound smart. That's how I said the confidence. Well, you are smart. I'm not going to say it makes you sound smart.
Thank you.
We're all smart here in our role as color commentary, but that's how it helps, right? Building that confidence, people realize it too, because most likely those people that are watching currently in NA or whatever region that you're currently casting, they probably don't watch the other regions too. So you're already that extra layer of expertise I talked about before, right? You're the subject matter expert. So if you actually have that time, you're able to build it up. It takes a lot of time. Well, let's face it. It does take a lot of time. It does take a lot of effort, but it pays off. It definitely pays off. Go ahead, Mimi.
One more point, because I know a lot of people here are still like doing a lot of like the tier 2 one-off events.
Yep.
Don't stress yourself out about preparing for those events, because 90% of the teams there are going to be random pugs that you're never going to see again. I mean, the only reason that I'm as knowledgeable on tier 2 as I am is just because I have casted so many events, and I just know players personally. So don't stress about it, because for the most part, you won't be able to find that info. It's better to admit in some ways when you maybe have a bit of a lack of knowledge and try and learn along with the viewer if it's an event like that, versus like when it's like a VCT where you know your teams, you can very strictly prepare for that. If it's like a Knight's Gauntlet or something, unless it's like one of the orgs that's playing,
you might not know, which is why, as I mentioned yesterday too, during Riv's part, is that if you actually know, at least from agent composition, what could be the basis of how the map is currently being played.
You got to go back to fundamentals.
Exactly. It gives you the fundamentals. You understand a little about that map. Are they applying it right from that team? If that pug team is actually applying, it's like, holy shit, they're actually able to be a little bit more concise than I thought. And what is now that extra layer that allows them to execute that well? And you could start building that into your story as well, right? So there's a lot that you could do with this. Like the roadmaps all over the place. When you're looking at color casting, I'm trying to find like the good in-between where you're going in this. This one is a little different here. It's called runitback.gg. So runitback.gg is actually a subscription portion right now. The reason why I have it is because from watching so many VODs, I'm starting to understand a little bit the tendencies and the players and stuff like that too. I feel that personally, I could start tackling a little bit more into my color commentary, which is now trying to see if there's going to be any stats or anything that I could learn so I could add into my analysis going into the matches. I'm not really there yet. I'm currently studying it, but I wanted to show you guys where I'm at right now. So runitback.gg, they have this subscription tier that's monthly, and the tier that I'm subscribed to is Radiant, which I think costs like 100 US a month. So I'm not asking you guys to invest into that. It's once you get to a point where you feel you could be at that point, and also the money's flowing and you have that money to invest in yourself, then by all means, right? But this is just an example where off Discord right over here, there's a bunch of commands that I could actually put in. Actually, this portion here I think is free, right? So you could go.
You can pay the cheap like $5.
There's also a $5 one for sure, and
that's what gives you access to the Discord bot.
Exactly. So you get into, okay, thank you. So I think it's called the platinum level. So you get into that one, you sign up, and you have these commands that I could put in. So for example, if I write run it back, the team kill locations with a question mark, it gives me a whole list of commands that I could actually use with this command over here to try to find all this information that I want. But what I have on this previous page, why it's costing me $100, is they have a lot of those main things that people actually query into the Discord and puts it into a almost digestible Excel file. So this is just one of those sections right now. Again, looking at Cloud9 over here, this is a graph that shows the speed of plants versus pre-plant kills on a time frame. So looking at Cloud9, what can I see over here right now? It's like in the first 10 to 20, 30 seconds, Cloud9 basically likes to rush into a site and try to get a plant. There's not much going on until like the end game or the mid game. So it shows that tendency right now that Cloud9 just likes to play very aggressively, right? And it goes back into, for example, their agent composition, double duelists. Couple of Silvas, and they're trying to push a little bit faster into a map like Icebox where fast executions could actually still work very well. Right, so it adds a little bit more meat into that, and you could say Cloud9 is actually very known to be really, really quick right now into their executions. And this was actually before they had their last IGL Mitch. When they were trying to qualify into the Challengers spot in Stage 3, they looked like they were just rushing sites every 15 seconds, and they were very, very one-dimensional. Now that they have Vanity, that could also be another extra layer to be like, oh, well, I used to know that Cloud9 2 events ago used to be very, very fast and try to execute very, very quickly. But now you could see a tendency with Vanity that there's more defaults. He's trying to pull more rotations and stuff like that too, and you could start ingraining that into your color commentary, bless you, and be more observant when you're looking at this type of play. And like I said, everything that you catch and that you're actually when you're watching the game, it doesn't necessarily have to be said on broadcast either, right? Because you have to pick and choose the right moment to talk about it too, because there's just so much going on within a round of Valorant. So if you feel that the moment's right to be able to talk about these things and you could bring it out, feel free to do so. Okay? Okay, the last one is VODs, right? Very, very important to, if you want to hone up your skills in color commentary. We already looked at this example over here. But if you go on YouTube and you search for the Valorant Champions Tour, go ahead. The Valorant Champions Tour account and Valorant Monday. These guys are really quick as to like uploading any type of matches that are outside of VCTs and any other tournament that's currently happening. For example, maybe even Tier 2 sometimes. It could be cut right away by Valorant Monday and put up onto a broadcast or onto YouTube, so you could actually start studying these teams as well. So right now, this is the exact screenshot that I was showing before, right? And what we look at the mini-map and stuff like that too. We're actually just going to try to look down a breakdown of this round over here, round number 14, 15, 16, sorry, of what's currently happening in this play. And I want us to run that exercise as a color commentator. What can we talk about? What can we think about? I'm not asking us to cast, but things that we could think about looking into the game. Okay, so before we actually push play, what can we look and what can we notice right away here looking at this, this screenshot or this pause screen? Yeah, go ahead. I'll just repeat it, by the way, with the microphone. We don't have to pass it around. I'll just repeat it as is that okay? Or do you prefer to pass the mic for every single answer? Yeah.
I think it would be better if, like,
We pass the mic?
yeah, just pass it.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
So, Darlene, what do you see first?
100 Thieves
Yeah.
is hovering more towards A, but it does seem like there may or may not be a fake going around B.
Perfect.
Kind of like a distraction.
That's a great start.
Yeah.
Perfect. Anything else that we see? Yeah, go ahead, Ash.
It looks like if I don't know what the name of the other team is. I can't see.
Oh, it's Gambit. So
Gambit,
100 Thieves and Gambit.
There we go. I don't know their logo. That's why.
Yeah, all good, all good.
It looks like. Am I looking at the right side? Yeah. If Gambit loses this round, they will be on an eco for the following round, and it will set up the eco really nicely for 100 Thieves to
Yes.
potentially make a comeback after that.
Exactly. I don't know if anybody watched this game, by the way, but 100 Thieves are like about to lose, right?
Yeah.
And they had like this superb comeback. It went in, it was pretty insane. And we had another great eagle clutch to actually, I strongly recommend for you guys to watch this game if you haven't. If you do want to rewatch it, just to see how they played and how they came back into the game. Welcome back, team. No worries. We're just doing an exercise, Mimi, of looking from a point of view of as a color commentator. What can we look at as we're breaking down the round? So we're looking at round number 16. So we just talked about here a potential setup here towards the A side for 100 Thieves with maybe a hit back towards the B side that Darlene just talked about, which was great. And then we also talked about the economy here for Gambit, that if they lose, they could go into an eco, which is a great observation. Go ahead here, Dan.
Just Viper's Pit going to be available.
That's a great one right there. So usually right now we're looking at this situation, even the positioning here from the Viper, that we can maybe see a Viper's Pit that's going to happen potentially right away into the round, right, to cover that map. Oh, that's what you're going to say, Jody? Okay, perfect. Just to cover an area of the map to make it a little bit easier for the defense. And do you have anything else, Darlene?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This is probably like not right, and I'm probably like way off, but the way that Viper's wall is positioned, there are like different ways that you can set it down.
Yep.
The way that hers is positioned is most likely for an aggressive push, probably a little bit further than the position that she's in. So she might go hide in a corner or possibly push up a little more.
Yep.
And it seems like Sage is going to be there to back her up under the circumstance that she needs to be traded.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. I think that could be a very good observation too, because the Sage, or she gets into a trade, or if Nats could actually fall away, he could actually get healed as well by the Sage, so they could both fall back if they both stay alive. The thing with the Viper wall, I think it brings up a great point. You could be aggressive if you want, because it's really covering up here both entries on the attacker side.
Yeah.
It also makes it very difficult for the attackers to gain early map control towards green, because every time you cross, you're actually losing 30 decay. So you have to cross once over here, and even once over here if you want to try to get a little bit more map control, depending on how the action's going, of course. But you are covering a lot of this, this ground control on the defenders, which is great. And another thing to add too is this could potentially make the retake a little bit easier on the defense if they play the retake, because if they actually are getting pressured on B side and they both fall back, you could always bring this Viper wall back up, and you have the rotators and the people that are still alive, of course if your Viper is still alive, to push back because this wall is going to come up too. Right? So there's a lot of things that we could watch. We don't have to mention all of this, right? Like I said, this is all things that we want to pay attention to once we're going through. Okay? So Jeff, let's start with the play, please. So we see right now, as you guys mentioned before, the setup here towards the attacker side, a smoke coming in, and there you go. The Viper's Pit started right away. Let's pause right now here, Jeff. And at the same time where we're looking here, this is very default. This is things that we don't have to talk about in terms of like a Sova play, because this is really normal that they're going to try to dart into the site if you already see a Sova in the area, and you have the attackers going to try to potentially move in very, very quickly, right? So as I talk about this, we have a poison cloud that came up here from the Viper on the attacker side here, which is currently being played by Nitro. And then you have the 4 players of 100 Thieves pushing in towards the A site, right? But what else is happening right now? Go ahead, Mimi.
It's pretty common for A-site holds these days, but it's just the high-low double duelists. When you have double duelists, they both have the escape mechanism for Shadows.
Yep.
He misses his shots, he can fall back and just drop down really safely,
Yep.
and he can do that off the contact of his teammate. If he gets a frag, he can also dismiss and stay up there for information.
Yep.
As well as at Defo holding the low ground, he has a dash back, and I mean, they obviously have good communication. The second someone breaks contact and one dashes back, the Reyna can drop off. It's a really safe setup
Yep.
that gives opportunities for early frags, making it very difficult to refrag.
Yeah, great. And the reason why I chose Icebox, not only this matchup, but Icebox, is because a lot of the Icebox matches usually will have a Jet and a Reyna in the composition. And if there is, they're usually playing the A site as anchors anyways on defense, right? It's one of the most common things that we see. Go ahead, Jody.
You could also note that you have that Sage watching mid, watching the smoke to
Correct.
ensure nobody's coming through mid into B side.
Exactly. So what's happening right now is because this is also an indication that the Poison Cloud just got popped here by
Yeah.
Nitro. And at the same time, we have Ethan that threw a dark cover towards Boiler. So right now, this actually covers the visibility that Chronicle currently has on Boiler. He's like, I can't see anything. I don't know what's going on. So they actually pulled out rotation from one of the defenders, which is going to be that Sage, to look down if there's anybody pushing down towards this area. And Chronicle, you could see him looking a little bit towards that left side of that smoke, so he could focus more on this area, right? A couple of things to look out for in terms of what's the communication that's happening. How do the defenders react to the initial plays here from 100 Thieves? Mimi, anything else?
In a composition like this, Nitro as the Viper, he has a lot of freedom around the usage of his utility. Because he has a second controller, he can save his wall for the late round. So if they're
Exactly.
playing that mid round, he can play fakes with it, he can commit it. You don't need to put down that default B wall, you don't need to put down that default A wall. You can just hold it in the back pocket, and it's because Ethan will always have a dark cover to aid,
Yep.
which gives a lot of flexibility, especially from Ethan's position denying that push. He can throw Paranoia, he can throw Smoke, he can almost sell something on his own. So there's a lot of kind of fallback plans. And 100 Thieves, I mean, they do this a lot. They like 4-1ing, especially
Correct.
when they have these controller comps.
Exactly. So then that's why even Nitro at this point is saving his toxic screen for later on too.
Yeah.
Jeff, can we resume a little bit, please? So right now the action is happening. Let's continue to pay attention here to this mini-map. So a turret comes up by Steel. He's placing it right by the orb. And now the players are falling back. Jeff, can you pause, please? Why are the players falling back? What do you think might be happening next? Yes, go ahead, Mimi, and then we'll pass it over here to Darlin.
Yeah, so it's just they wanted to make this initial contact because I think that they're aware, because Gambit has probably been doing this for a while with the aggressive pushes out towards A. They just want to get that turret established and help Steel to gain that map control, because by default you don't really have that control. You don't control Maze off the rip as an attacker. By placing that turret, that gives Steel insurance, which allows the rest of his team to re-rotate, maybe re-clear through mid, whatever they want to do in the mid round. And that turret just works as an insurance policy, which as long as Steel is within AoE, he can lurk mid, he
Yep.
can finish A, he can do so much, and as the IGL as well, that gives him a good chunk of information when he's comparing with Ethan as well, who has all that space out towards B main.
Yeah, so AoE, area of effect, for WoW nerds, we kind of know. And at the same time, you're going to say here, Darlene, anything else you want to add?
No.
No? Okay. So yeah, the turret is actually a very good play, and we talked about this push and pull, right? The map control at the beginning of the rounds. So the recon dart came out. We saw a lot of wall bang happening from the defender side into the spawn side, but nobody really gained anything out of it, right? So you could talk about that stalemate right now, and you could actually start talking about 100 Thieves pulling back. Is it really only about the turret? Who knows? My prediction going into this one and how I was able to predict this right is that you can also pay attention to what's left in terms of utilities on both ends. So what does Hiko still have here? The Owl Drone, right? And what's a great way to clear Viper's Pit is the Owl Drone itself, which is why from this whole execution that's happening here, and even the focus from a play-to-play and from an audience, you're looking at this current game and you're looking at the A action. What's still happening towards the B side is that Ethan is still making sure that nobody's pushing out on that B side, so they still gain that map control. They still conserve that area, of the map, so they don't lose that ground. So when Mimi was talking about the 4-1 that 100 Thieves like to do a lot, this allows for them to fall back and maybe regain control on the other end. But as they pull back, what's going to help them maintain map control on A side? It's that exact turret here from Steel. Right? So you're still having some sort of a stalemate. It's a chess game, but you could see slowly but surely you're trying to get something going on here from 100 Thieves' side. Right? So Jeff, can we resume, please? So the poison cloud comes down, so they have to bring that up. You're starting to ping this at the same time just in case if anybody's moving forward. But you can see right now that 100 Thieves are currently doing a couple of different things. Steel goes back into being a lurk towards mid side. And just pause here real quick, sorry, Jeff. So Steel is watching this mid side for the push. You still had Ethan that's watching the push towards B side. And what's good, and that they're still remaining control of the A side, is this turret still here. If the turrets gets shot, then there's a possibility that 100 Thieves may think that somebody is pushing on defense a little bit more aggressively so that they could try to flank him back. But as nothing is happening, they can really focus more towards this mid and this B side. So Jeff, please resume. So what happens over here is, as I mentioned before, Hiko is going back into this area where he's about to throw the Owl Drone into the Viper's Pit to try to push Nats out of his position. Right? So you see the Owl Drone moving in right now. Nats is trying to cover that up, so he's putting a lot of smokes. And it already looks like everybody's really trying to get into the site. Let's pause over here. Sorry, Jeff. What do you guys think is happening at this point here? Yeah, let's start here with Darlin, and then we'll bring it over to Mimi.
So they got information with the Owl Drone that Viper wasn't within her smoke. That
Yep.
allowed them to get aggressive and push out through it. So now that they know that Viper's backing off due to the drone spotting her, Nats has to step back and where the sage is and reposition himself. So now they can push up more aggressively, leading to them having a little bit more site control, basically.
Yeah, and it's great, actually, but I think one clarification, I don't think here that I didn't pay attention to this part again because we're looking at the mini map a lot as color, but I don't think Nats actually got pinged by the Owl Drone, but at least
No,
hearing that
yeah.
Owl Drone gets him away, right? And what else do we have? We had the paranoia that's being thrown here by Ethan just to make sure that we're clearing the area from the Owl Drone, but we're also clearing yellow so these guys can actually push out more aggressively and trade, right? And Mimi?
I imagine he's going to throw up his Viper wall right when we unpause because his life is more valuable in the retake here. As long as he's alive, they have an infinitely better chance of winning this in the post. He's fine with conceding the space because he has information. He can hear at least 3 players running nearby, can infer that the rest of the team is there because you notice there's a mid push already coming down from his Sova. If Chronicle can catch Steel, then they 100% know that it's just going to be a B commit at that point.
Yep.
And by Nats living, it allows his retake to come quite easily, especially since Chronicle, if he can make his way back, you have a dart for that retake. You have that wall to hold up as well. I mean, it just puts him in a better position, but Nats dies here. You have no smokes, nothing to cover. The Sage Wall was already used, so that retake gets less and less doable.
Correct. So that's one thing for sure that we could talk about in terms of like chiming up with your play-by-play to really look at the execution currently of 100 Thieves into this B site. But is there anything else that we could pay attention to as a color commentator? Yes, go ahead, Jody.
You could also pay attention to Sage moving out from mid to go back up Viper, and
Yep.
Sova replacing her spot mid to watch for, to have mid control.
Exactly. I think this is really important right over here because you still have Steel that's lurking towards his mid side. There's 2 scenarios that could happen right now in this position. First one is that you have a full execution from 100 Thieves into the B site, and Steel is going to try to play the late lurk and try to backstab from under tube, right? Or the other one is that he's still watching mid and trying to see if he could punish anybody pushing towards another area where they could potentially regain map control. So the way that I see this right now here is that, Jeff, can you resume for a bit, please? So Steel is looking down. It's off camera. He gets a kill. Let's pause right now. And from the way that I saw this right now is that, as Mimi mentioned, you see this the toxic screen probably is going to come up soon because we actually have Nats that stayed alive. But the biggest thing that's happening right now that's currently not on the screen is that Steel got the kill into mid, right? But what's more important is that not only did Steel get a kill into mid, his turret was never activated, right? So as his turret is never activated, there's a possibility that, well, not a possibility, it's guaranteed that nobody's pushing from the A site towards that flank. So you see right now that 100 Thieves are currently just running back inside this Viper's Pit because this Big Hills thinks that they now have a maximum 5-on-1, 5-on-2 situation into the A site to retake. See what I mean? So then let's resume here, Jeff. So he gets this kill. You see these guys starting to push up. They're still selling this fake. And during this whole time, this turret never gets pulled up. So this gives the opportunity right now for 100 Thieves, especially with the Viper's Pit, the toxic screen that came out from Nats, to say, look, it's going to be easier for us to move towards the A side. Steel could also cut rotations coming back into this mid side as well. Couple of trades, the fake is perfectly sold, and now everybody from 100 Thieves are running back into the A side, and they get into the map, into the round, and they get the plant right after. So all of these things that you actually were able to pin out here towards this towards the minimap during this play, it could be one of those moments that you could even interject your play by the commentator, right? It's like, oh my God, Steel actually just got a kill. This could actually pull a big rotation from 100 Thieves back into the A side. Then just plug that in so that your play-by-play could be ready for that, so the observers could be ready for that, and you continue to paint this story where now they're able to resume back into the A side, they get better positioning into the site at the same time too, and eventually the pulls plant, right? So, Mimi, go ahead.
I just want to.
Yeah. And you could pause it here, Jeff, and we could go back to the presentation. That was the exercise right there.
I just want to be
Thank
a
you.
nerd for 1 second, in that I love how they play around that Viper wall. For I forget who it was. It was Nats and his Sage there as well. They just set up instantly that crossfire. It's similar to how a lot of teams play around the Cosmic Divide and
Yep.
completely deny, because most of the time that wall is used just into the retake, but by Nats living, he doesn't even have to fully commit back to the retake. He can keep fighting off that assist.
Yep.
Gambit, good team.
Gambit, definitely good team. White champion of Berlin. But yeah, so based off this exercise right here, I wanted to actually go into the next slide. Was actually that exercise, was the lesson in itself, looking at all of this, was it overwhelming for anybody? A little bit?
It's always a little.
Yeah. So it kind of gives you like a gauge from person to person. It could differ from any of you right now, or be different, sorry, from any of you right now, as to where do you think you should start? Should it be just looking at just the abilities, just the ultimates? What could be the key moments right now that you could focus on that's going to be more general, that's going to help the audience understand a play or digesting a play, right? Yeah, and I'll get right up to you, darling. And then right after, like how we got into like the deep micro as to like, okay, this turret could do this smoke could do that, this owl drone's gonna do this, that's gonna come with experience and with time as well, right? And that you can learn as you go and you get more reps, you watch more VODs, and you watch more games. Darling, go ahead.
Oh, I just thought you were asking, like when you said, what do you think you should start? I thought you wanted us to answer.
Oh, if you want. I mean, we could always share it. If you guys think that you want to, or if you guys want to share anything you want to be working on for sure when you start, feel free to share, because we could all be on the same page at the same time too.
So I share.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Where's the mic? There it is.
In general, I've been starting to watch more analytical videos to kind of learn about like what's going on. But I think focusing more on kind of not relying on those analytical videos to give me that, sense of information, and doing it myself via VOD review, and to try to, because I feel like it's easy to like listen to it and try to understand it, but then when the time comes and you're in the moment, you'll completely blank out. So I think getting into the flow of just knowing how to do it without having to like refer back or even think about it, it's more like second nature to you. Like Mimi, she can just on the spot figure out like what would be a good scenario here, because she's used to it.
Yeah, and exactly what, like the analytical streams, like there's sideshows, there's Riv when he's preparing for events. I do a lot of these myself, and there's probably a couple more too. But watching some of these streams to actually have these discussions, because within the chat itself, we actually do a lot of like back and forth and conversation too, and do something like these, how do you call it? Theory crafting into all of these rounds, right? And have that open and honest discussion where we don't judge anybody going into that as well. And sometimes Slideshow's not always right, I'm not always right, and we can make sense out of it all together, which allows that a little bit more to understand that game as you go. You'll be less pressured, or feel more confident looking into the VODs of yourselves too, understanding the conversations that you have with your peers too, right? So a great way to start, Practice casting, as we mentioned before, so even after watching the practice streams, watching VODs, and then trying to practice that at the same time, into like trying to call those out, or try to go into that type of like recap type of analysis, depending where you want to be right now as a caller commentator, right? VOD review with your peers, of course, is going to be very beneficial, and as Riv mentioned before, as I've mentioned before, and now we're always available as well to be able to do these VOD reviews together, live or whatnot, or just a VOD in the past, any casting you've done in the past too that we actually have a look at and see the improvement as we go. Feel free to send us a message. I'm not going to speak on behalf of everybody else, but at least for me, it's not a problem. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, no worries. Anything else, darling?
No.
Okay, because you're
I'm just
your mic
holding, no,
closer.
I'm just holding the mic like I'm a superstar. Like, this
Awesome.
is what I do.
Last but not least, I say start networking, because I think in those next steps, when we're actually starting to be a little bit more comfortable in our analytical skills, into our color commentary, into our way that we present ourselves, the way that we cast, you could start looking at networking not only with an agency, but with your peers as well, to see if they could actually get you in somewhere, right? Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, so my main thing for networking, especially, and I know there's like a whole thing about it right now because we talked about it yesterday too, but I don't know how to find someone to work with constantly for Valorant. I have a issue with that because I don't know who to go to, the people that I worked with. I've worked with a bunch of people so far, but none of them really feel like I can continue working with them in the long term. So I don't know what you would recommend or how to connect with more people that would be willing to cast with me as well.
Yeah, I think that it's totally fine as well that when you want to start with somebody, that if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
No harm, no foul. I mean, if we're all professionals about it, if we don't want to like bring each other down, I don't think it should be an issue to say, look, it's not going to work out, and finding your next partner. And I think one of the important ones, I think, was Valorant Tolerant, I think, as a Discord that a lot of people are hanging out in to try to find duos and stuff like that as well. Try to find that opportunity to talk with those people. Yeah. And even when you're looking at somebody that's currently casting in the tier 2 scene and they sound pretty good, and that you feel that you might have some sort of good chemistry with them when you're going to start, when you want to cast, then feel free to reach out to them too.
I think most tier 2 casters, I can't really think of anyone tier 2 is like has an established duo.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head.
Exactly. So like, for example, like, I don't know, Mimi is tier 1. Tyler Metro's trying to work his way up, right?
I did one event that wasn't even an event. No shot. You're tier 1, but you made it. You made that one event.
Yeah, but so for example, there's Tanner Metro, there's Kay Lunek, there's even Ito over here. Like if there's people that you think you might be able to do something with and try to practice that, feel free to have that discussion with them. And then it comes down to that networking of how do you get into these, right? So you could start talking about talking to people like myself, to Sideshow, hey, can you do a VOD review? How do you think we're doing right now? If we feel that it's good and we could see the opportunity in the opportunity in there and the talent that you could show, then we could definitely like start talking to NSG or something like that as well, right? Darlene, you had a question?
No,
Comment?
Yeah. In general, I think I've casted with a ton of people.
Yep.
Just because right now I'm trying to find my duo, and I think what really helps, I mean, like the Valorant Talent thing is something I never thought of. So like I'll definitely like try to ask people to like, trial out with me or something, like help me find my duo or something like that. I don't know. But I find it really helpful to like just keep like doing what I'm doing, and eventually if I find someone that kind of like matches the vibe that I'm going with, then obviously at that point, I mean, I'm already still going up regardless of whether or not I have a duo, so I'm building my image as well as finding my duo.
Don't let that slow you down, right? If you haven't found a duo. Which is why me, like, look, I've done VCTs, I've done Masters, I've done LCQ, and then do I have a duo? Not yet, right? I'm still trying to find that path. That's why I'm still chameleoning between doing play-by-play for Game Changers, doing color for Game Changers, doing color for LCQ, doing analyst desk for Masters. Like I want to show that I'm out there, and at the same time I'm good enough in my eyes, like as a basis for all of those 3 roles, that that once I find that duo and I want to find my play-by-play duo, then I could start focusing more on the color. So personally, I feel that I'm not allowing myself to one up that quickly because I always have to work with new people and readjust, but at least I have a good start, right? Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked for that is because I feel like, with Valorant jumping in, I jump in a couple months after the game. It's actually pretty recently that I got into Valorant casting because for me, I wanted it to feel natural, like a natural transition as well. But when I was doing Overwatch and when I started with Overwatch, I was lucky enough that they put me with a partner and we continue to work together up to this day. And then we started both climbing, and then I started also getting some opportunities by myself. So it was kind of all just slowly working together, but I realized that for Valorant, it is happening like a lot different. Like even if I try to reach out to people that I'm interested in working with or organizations that I want to work for, there's a lot of people right now.
It's difficult. It's difficult for sure.
Yeah, so I feel like I want to obviously continue working and continue improving, continue doing what I'm doing to the point that I get the spot or I get the attention enough to join in one of those orgs. But again, like it's comes to having that synergy. I feel like does a lot
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, for sure. I think one, a duo is very important. If you're able
Yeah.
to start early, then go ahead. But if not, definitely try to one up your own game as well.
Yeah.
And I think what could also help, which is in 2 slides, well, I'll just talk about it now, is the demo reel. I'm not going to play it, but the demo reel itself, I have a demo reel that I've made that's about, I think it's 1.5 to, well, sorry, mine is 2 minutes and 15 seconds. But on average, you want it to be about 1.5 to 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, because you also don't want to like snooze fest the people that are going to be watching your demo reel. You want to be impactful off the rip. You want to show what you look like in front of a camera. You want to show your highest moments as well into this demo reel to make sure that you basically sell yourself as a brand to this potential TO that wants to hire you, right? So I think from the way that I place my demo, I start off with my face already so people know what I look like, although I still used my face from 2 years ago, so it's a little bit more round now. I'm still working on it to get back where it was before. And then I showed, okay, after that I showed my play-by-play. Then I showed my face again, but on the analyst desk for First Strike. Then I showed more play-by-play. Then I showed myself again as a host for Rainbow Six. Then I showed some play-by-play in Counter-Strike because I wanted to show that I could do more than just Valorant in case I want to switch out to a different game. So putting that together and putting that onto like pinned onto your Twitter and stuff like that too. We were talking about branding and stuff like that as well. Put your demo reel in there too. Go ahead, Nat.
yeah, do you think or we can get some feedback on the reels because
Yeah, definitely. We could definitely look at
That'd be
those.
great.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah. So I got my feedback from BMT, from my talent agency at Bad Moon Talent, and the one that I got was approved by them, so I could definitely give you my feedback.
That'd be great.
Looking
Thank
at
you.
that as well. Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Real fast.
Yes, go ahead, Sierra.
Sorry, I was curious on like networking because like I'm super new to like being in casting for Valorant.
Yep.
Super fortunate I get picked up into a duo right away, so I don't
Yeah.
have to thankfully worry about that aspect. But I feel like I'm being tagged along as like the newbie or like we won't even like there's been a couple of events where like my casting duo is considered for the event because of what he has brought and what he's like done and stuff.
Yep.
But they won't even consider me because of the name, so they
Yeah.
won't pick us up. So I was curious about like how to properly network and establishing my own name like beyond just like a time, because obviously with time things will happen, but like
Exactly.
we're kind of getting declined now because of that.
I was going to mention that too because there's some point where you might be the person that's going to be good enough or better than the other person, and then you're going to get those events and that other person is not as well. It gets into that competition still no matter what, that despite we all want to like help each other out and one up with each other, we still compete with each other, right, for spots. So it's good, that's why I'm talking about this ego. It's good to have that confidence turn it into like, I'm gonna fucking kick everybody's asses and I'm gonna be that best caster, right? And it's okay to have that mentality. When you go into that style of like, okay, where can I start networking? I think it's going back again. Start prepping yourself, getting your reps in, build that demo reel and be comfortable as where you're at. Start contacting myself, other peers that are currently within that scene. We could look at your VODs together. We could look at your style together too. And you could use people like me, like even Mimi as she's growing into the scene as well. I'm just gonna put you on the spot, message Mimi as well. And then maybe we could also help each other out to try to like move forward all together, right? And then see what happens. But again, as I mentioned before, we're still competing with each other at the same time too, right? So if you have people that you trust, people that you could talk to, feel free, right? And again, I'm one of those outlets that you could reach out to.
Appreciate
And we
it.
go from there because you don't necessarily have to go with agencies from the beginning, right? And this I'm just leaving it as a slide because I don't have any slides on agencies. This is more like a talk right now as me to you guys. So I signed with BMT, as I mentioned before, almost a year ago. And the reason why I signed with BMT is because when I got into Valorant, so I've been casting video games for 19 years now, right? On and off. But I was basically one of those first people that actually started broadcasting video games back in 2003, 2002. But all that stuff didn't mean shit as I come back into Valorant. Nobody fucking knows me. Everybody's younger. Like I'm 37 now. Who the hell that's 18, 19, 20 knows me from my password? Because let's face it, they weren't even fucking born yet, right? So I had to rebuild my brand. I had to rebuild my case. But what was good with me was throughout all these years that I've been broadcasting video games, I was also able to network with Bach, for example, at NSG. I know not Sideshow, but I knew like Puckhead, I knew Golden Boy, I know those people, and they helped me out to get back into it. But at the same time, when I was actually getting events, I was like, I feel I'm still getting paid a little bit too low compared to others. But I don't know if I could actually go out to the rate that Golden Boy or Puckhead currently has, because I don't have that name and that branding anymore. So I was like kind of stuck in between like a limbo and stuff like that too. And I thought that BMT could actually help me out with this, right? In terms of like negotiating my rates, helping out with my rates and stuff like that too. At the end of the day, in hindsight, throughout the first year, if I reflect back towards that year, I feel that I could have been able to do this on my own, right? But where it really helps me with BMT is that I feel that an agency is like a two-way street. I'm going to be investing into myself, but also paying the agency even though I'm finding these events on my own, I have to pay the agency, but at least it's helping me build my brand within the agency so that let's say I don't make it into one of the main casters for Valorant. Let's say I want to move into a different game later on because I don't have these opportunities in Valorant, then at least I have somebody who's endemic within the scene that already knows my work, that knows what I already brought to the table throughout my last year and what I could bring into another game that I want to bring in. So I'm like investing in myself at the same time too. And that's what's very important too, investing in yourself when you have these opportunities. Just a sheer example of that runitback.gg that I pay $100 a month. I'm investing in myself and investing in my knowledge to be better, right? Sierra?
I'm curious for opportunities like with an agency and without an agency.
Yeah.
Because you've said like, mostly like your interest in it is for rate negotiation, not necessarily finding opportunities, though obviously for some others maybe that's the thing.
Yeah.
But obviously is like Valorant's looking to be going like bigger the next couple of years and like signing on contracts and stuff. Is that something where an agency is helpful in getting those contracts, or is it more so like you're still on a level playing field if you do not have an agency to be kind of contacting or representing on your behalf?
I think one of the best examples that we have so far is currently Doug, right? As esports Doug, he's not with an agency right now, but he's still able to get those master's jobs right now too. So I think it's not only about the agency that's going to help you succeed, it's yourself that's going to help you succeed, right? You just got to figure out how you're going to find these opportunities, and it's not necessarily with the agency themselves. If you're going to get into, for example, CSA might potentially still put a lot of importance into Golden Boy, into Puckett, because they're really high name, high stake profiles, and when you're looking at the list of an event that's available, they'll probably put them at the top, and you're still trying to work your way up. So as I mentioned before, we're still competing within each other, right? So how do you make yourself better? It's just working on yourself too. And then I guess landing these events, like tier 2, tier 3, is that networking, as I mentioned before. Like when Mimi says like there's nobody that has a set duel right now, everybody's like kind of trying to figure things out. You could always message those people and see if they want to give you a shot, but how will they shoot? How will they risk it, for example, to working with you? Well, get the practice in with the VOD reviews, get the practice in with the casting reviews, getting your reel, and see if it works out in synergy. I'll pass to you first then, and it's okay, I'll pass it to you after, maybe? Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I know we were talking about this yesterday as well, but I wanted to ask you something.
Yep.
Do you ever feel like you are almost competing with the agency to get things first? Because I feel like there would be a scenario where, like you said, you could get a lot of those gigs, and they could also get them. So
Correct.
if you get them, that definitely makes a difference for you. And I feel that scenario right now is the same case. So I don't know how to handle a situation like this where I know that with my networking I could be getting those opportunities before they're given to me.
Yeah, I think if you have the opportunities to get, these events before an agency does, do it on your own first. And I think the more that you're going to be able to do on your own, the more agencies will probably keep an eye out on you and probably want you in to those other things if you want to branch out to other things as well. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, and I wanted to share a little bit about that, and is that the reason why I got into Batman as well was because what really caught their attention, and this is something that also connects to the last session that we had, was that they really care about numbers. They really care about numbers in social media, and of course your presence in esports and where you are in esports. So if I were to make a recommendation, and this is, I signed with them a little bit over a month ago, so it's pretty recent, but growing numbers and like, I know they mentioned like how much they care about TikTok and things like that, where you start to consider that you need to expand like everything that you do. And on top of that, because the more content, the better it's going to be for them as well to get you any sponsorships.
In the end, an agency is also trying to be a business too, right? So how can they make money off you? If you're actually starting to get a huge TikTok following, then there's going to be some brands that want to work with you. And if those brands work with you, that brings them money. And if that's continuously bringing you money, that's going to continuously bring them money, which is why they're going to continuously work with you, which is why I'm in that spot where signing with BMT, I have an opportunity to work a lot with Riot so far with all the VCTs. I'm paying them, but I'm also investing into myself and in them in the long term so I could see if there's other opportunities later on if I don't make it into the VCT circuit, right? Sierra?
Yeah. Sorry. For like creating content, like outside of it, is there ever a point at the content at which the content is more like a liability to agencies and stuff? Because obviously, like, big numbers is good, but all of a sudden, if you're so branded in one thing that you're not, like, then adaptable to a show or something, is that then a negative, or is that just kind of like an overthinking of things?
So I signed with BMT with not that much in terms of like a following. I don't do that much on Instagram aside from like posting pictures of my food and golfing. So they won't make any money out of that either, right? So they're making money out of me in terms of casting. But they also have another marketing area where people like, for example, Autumn, who's currently with version 1, and my friend Marissa Roberto do get a lot of deals with marketing brands because they have a high social media platform into that too. So they could kind of like put you in different categories as well to be able to still run their business. So you don't necessarily have to sign with the agency because you have to do all of that. If you really want to focus onto the casting part, you just sign for that too. And I know you're a full-time content creator too. And for me, for example, I had a discussion with BMT to say, look, if I'm streaming right now, I'm doing VOD reviews and I'm getting like subs and whatnot, am I giving you a portion of that? And they're like, you know what? We're not gonna take it. So you can always have those discussions to make sure clear cut any agreement what you're signing up for.
Yeah.
So, but again, as Mimi mentioned, I think for us, everybody in this room here is like, just bring that grind up, bring your rep up, network personally outside of the agencies and see where that takes you first. Okay?
Yep.
Anything else? Yeah, Dan?
Yeah, there's one thing. So you mentioned that you like using the agency to for your rates as well, so
Yep.
that people respect that. How do you do that?
For my rates,
Yeah, like how do you go and then like to negotiate? Because I feel like I'm also not the greatest at negotiating,
Yeah.
so I would like to take advantage of that too.
so the funniest thing is, so when I first started, like I said, I was doing a lot lower than everybody else in terms of like Golden Boy and Bucket and stuff like that too. And when I signed with the agency, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna give it a shot and just bring my rates up by X amount. And I was starting to be able to get it. So I got really lucky in terms of it at the same time, but I guess it's not really luck, it's because I work hard for it too. Like the VODs coming in, continue to practice, continue to rewatch my VODs to see how I could better myself every single time. But in terms of like the rate negotiations, is my conversation that I had with BMT is, how much do I want to make in a year, right? How much do I want to make in a year? How many events could I potentially get in a year? What should my rates be within that year? And I think having somebody like BMT to try to push for that rate has been helpful. But there has been moments where I wanted to have a certain amount where I still had to negotiate down a little bit into something that's more acceptable, because also I can't get my full rate for every single event, because not every event has that same budget too, right? Depending what tiers, what teams participate, depending who's doing what. Like for example, offline TV, in terms of a charity event, I was able to get my full rate. Red Bull, I'm able to get my full rate. And then I go into like an upcoming event where I have to negotiate down a little bit too and accept that rate because they don't have that budget.
Yeah, do you have a sort of a specific number limit to an event where you wouldn't go that low?
Yes, and that's another watch out too. Actually, that's a great observation or question that leads into this in terms of advice too. Is that once you get into an agency too, there might be a point where if you're setting yourself at a certain rate, there's a great amount of time that you're going to have to just drop an event from then on. So for example, now that I'm with BMT and I'm doing VCTs, I'm not doing the nights monthly. I'm not doing the NSGs monthly and stuff like that too, because our rate's too high now. And even for me personally, I want to give that opportunity for people like you to actually get to that moment, right? Like for me, I can't, technically, if, like thankfully I have like these side projects that are going on right now, but technically I cannot make a living out of just casting Valorant for now. But I chose that because I want to be the best Valorant caster. I don't want to move and do like Valorant and Apex and CSGO. It's because I love Valorant, I love the community, and I love this game, and I want to be the expert at this game. And if I'm going to start losing 10 hours to like cover CS, then I'm losing 10 hours of expertise that I could bring into Valorant, right? So it's like I'm sacrificing some things in the first place. Then it comes down to, well, now that I'm already doing masters, VCTs, and I'm aspiring and potentially coming close to being one of the main people that are going to cast, I still want to give opportunities for people like you to grow. So I can't be the person hogging every single event and like lowball every single one of my peers, because at that point you're going to get yourself hated by your peers and you're going to get blacklisted by your peers at the same time too. So you don't want to make sure that you're in a respectable amount that's respected by your peers too when you're negotiating these rates and when you're giving yourself these rates. Okay. So yes, there's been a lot of moments where I had to give up on events just because my rate's too high now. Cool?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry that I passed the time by like 15 minutes. We could continue to talk. I'm going to stick around here for tonight too. I think there's going to be some practice casts at the same time. If you guys wanted to do that, we could start looking at that as well. Hopefully this helped. But if there's other questions too after we send a presentation, feel free to reach out to me too.
Yeah.
Cool?
Thank you.
Thanks guys.